As Lawrence said, my name's Lucy and I'm a supervisor. I work with the Northampton office at MOLA, and that's where I'm based, and that's where most of our staff who are working on this project are based at. So what we're going to be talking about today, so we'll talk about where the site is, why we're working here, what we've done so far, what we found with these excavations, what we're currently doing, and what's next on the agenda. So to start, what we're not talking about is dinosaurs, sadly. A lot of people seem to think that we dig up dinosaurs, but they're actually a bit too old for us. We only study the human past, and dinosaurs were a bit before humans were around. So sorry if you're expecting dinosaur bones. So just have a look at where the sites that we're going to be excavating are located. We're starting from the Black Cat roundabout, on the left of the screen, and moving across to the Caxton Gibbet roundabout on the right. And we've got a slightly better analysis of the scheme here. So the proposed scheme is to put in a new dual carriageway between these two roundabouts to improve links between the roundabouts and between Milton Keynes, Bedford and Cambridge. Because currently we've only got a single carriageway connecting these two areas, which gets quite congested. I don't know if anybody's been around the Black Cat roundabout recently, but it's not super fun, especially at rush hour. So both roundabouts are going to be upgraded to modern free-flowing junctions, and there's going to be a new junction at Cambridge Road as well, improving access to St Neots Town Centre and the train station. This is being conducted by National Highways to basically meet these four aims: safety, economic growth, connectivity and community. So overall, they want to make everything safer for the communities that live in this area, connect them better and allow for better economic growth with jobs and people so they can move around, travel to where they need to be. If you do want to find out more about this scheme, the proposed scheme, you can use any of these contact numbers and information here. I can't tell you too much about it. I'm only an archaeologist. I can't tell you too much about the construction work, but please do get in touch with National Highways if you'd like to know more about it. And we have got a little video here. Let's see if it actually plays. Oh, there we go. Tell you a little bit more about the scheme.
The A428 provides a vital link between the M1 and the M11, connecting Milton Keynes and Cambridge, two of the UK's fastest growing places. Along with the new A14, it will form part of a key route to the ports of Felixstowe and Harwich. The A428 between St Neots and Caxton Gibbet is the only stretch of single carriageway between Milton Keynes and Felixstowe. Drivers experience regular delays and congestion in the area. The route carries over 24,000 vehicles per day, and there's also a high number of incidents. Our proposals will upgrade the route between the Black Cat roundabout and Caxton Gibbet roundabout with a new 10-mile dual carriageway. There will be a new 3-tier junction at Black Cat roundabout with traffic flowing freely on the A1, travelling under the junction, while the new dual carriageway will travel over it. New junctions at Caxton Gibbet and Cambridge Road and a new link at Eltersley will help traffic flow. We'll also be creating new, safer access roads for some of the villages along the route and providing new bridges to ensure communities stay connected. The existing A428 between St Neots and Caxton Gibbet will become a local road for local traffic and public transport. Better journey times and a more reliable network will help to bring communities and businesses closer together, create job opportunities and support long-term sustainable growth. Journey times will be cut by more than a third at peak times, saving up to 10 minutes each way, as much as an hour and a half over a working week. Routes for walkers, cyclists and horse riders will be improved, with separate routes through the junctions and safer crossing points. There'll be some reductions in road noise and air quality will improve. We'll enhance the local environment by planting trees, creating woodland and hedgerows, and will protect wildlife by using fencing and tunnels to encourage them to pass safely under the road. These improvements will also help to restore village life. The new road will help reduce dangerous rat running on unsuitable local roads, with up to 4,000 fewer vehicles using them. Our plans will make a real difference, not only to the many people who use the road to get to work, visit loved ones or transport goods, but to the communities living around the scheme.
need to replay that. That just tells you a little bit more about the scheme and what National Highways is proposing to do. So I'll move on to the archaeology, maybe, or let me skip. There we go. The archaeology side of things, which I know a little bit more about. So why are we here? Basically, due to the high archaeological potential of the landscape that's going to be affected by this proposed road scheme, previous works have identified the potential impact on archaeological remains. So we are going to come in and basically have a look at what archaeology is existing already, record it as best we can, so that when the road does come through, we'll have a record of what was there before. So just a brief overview of what archaeologists actually do. We do a lot of digging. Without digging holes, we wouldn't know what was in the ground. So putting holes in the ground is really important. And from there, we can understand what kind of features are in the landscape, identify ditches and pits and more interesting features like kilns and ovens. We then record these features. We take really detailed records using photographs, drawings, writing interpretations. They all get surveyed in. We create really nice plans. Everything's being done using a GPS on this scheme. So we create really nice digital plans of the site, which gets saved and used in post-ex. Everything that we do find on site, all the artifacts, all the soil samples that we collect, everything gets processed in our post-excavation departments, and everything gets reported on once the project is completed. We also do a lot of engagement with communities, including this talk. So what have we done so far, and what do we already know? So before we even begin an archaeological excavation, we conduct a desk-based study, which looks at the historic environment record, aerial photographs, books, maps, previous excavations, anything that might give us an indication of what archaeology we are expecting in the area. So we can see a satellite image here, which shows some crop marks. Can kind of see them faintly, which look like some ditches, some enclosures. And so we were able to use that to help us identify that there might be some archaeology in this area. We'll then move on to our geophysical survey, which is a non-intrusive survey. We've got quite an interesting contraption there. You can see in the photo on the left. That's our geophys car, as we call it, which conducts a magnetometry survey. There are different types of geophysics, but we tend to use magnetometry, which records the changes in the magnetic field in the ground. And that shows disturbances, which not just archaeology, but also utilities like electric cables. And you can see the train line here as well, with these big black and white lumps on the image on the right. But then you can also see where those very faint lines, which were seen in the crop marks, they showed it really well on the geophysical survey. And we can see those enclosures really clearly. It's kind of like a backwards D, this one, with subdivisions inside, and you can see the ring ditches as well, which we identified as roundhouses, but I'll talk more about this later. So then once we've done all of our surveys, we can start digging a little bit. Basically, we want to test if that geophysical survey is correct, because sometimes it's not quite right, sometimes it misses things, sometimes it picks up anomalies in the ground. So we do our trial trenching. So we put these in places where we think there's going to be archaeology, and also places around the possible archaeology to test what might be empty ground, just to see if we've missed anything. So in total, 1,340 trenches were dug across the scheme, which is a pretty big number, a pretty big feat, I think. And you can see in the picture on the right, somebody recording some pits that were excavated in one of these trenches. So we then went to full mitigation for some areas, which means we stripped the entire area and we can get a better look at the archaeology rather than just these small strips in the ground where we put trenches in. So for some areas, we started them a little bit earlier than the main scheme. So because of lessons learned from previous projects for national highways, we realised that they needed to start some archaeological works earlier. So a couple of sites were started to allow for a new bridge to be constructed over the railway and accommodate the Cadent gas main, which was being diverted. So this was the first area, sort of site that we opened. I was able to work on this one as an archaeologist before I got my promotion. It was really fun working on this one. Being the first mitigation site on the scheme was really exciting to go out there. There wasn't a huge amount of archaeology here, but some really interesting things. So we can see a really nice plan on the right, which shows the different areas. At the top of the hill, we had area 1, which had the most archaeology in it, 2 in the middle, which didn't have too much, and 3 at the bottom, which had some peripheral activity related to the settlement, which you can see in the north. The red lines there, those represent the geophysical survey. So we can see there are some enclosures up there. So we had some peripheral activity in that area 3 at the bottom of the hill. So in area 1, which had the most exciting stuff, it turned out to be sort of an unenclosed early Iron Age settlement, so around 800 to 350 BC. There was a ring ditch, which we've interpreted as a roundhouse. You can see that in the zoomed in plan in the middle. There were a lot of post holes as well, which indicate post-built roundhouses as well. We had a fair few pits and things related to other activity. There was middle to late Iron Age pottery as well, so settlement continued from the early Iron Age through to the late Iron Age, and potentially later. So the settlement that was up in the north, that was late Iron Age to Roman, and they found in some of the trial trenches there a complete Iron Age bow brooch, which is really exciting. That's from around 400 and 275 BC. There was also some evidence for later activity in that area at the top of the hill. Some medieval pottery potentially. We think there might have been a Saxon sunken floor building, but I think that's still up for debate. I don't think the post-text is quite conclusive on that one yet. But definitely a later post-medieval ditch, which you could see that very straight black line through the middle there. That would have been much later. And we had some furrows and things as well. So once we were done with that area, we moved on to another site near Tempsford. So this was a large Middle Iron Age to Roman enclosed farmstead. This is actually the one that we had a picture of earlier when I was showing you the crop marks and the geophysical map. So this was actually this site. We then went here, which was a really, really exciting site. It was tricky to work in. There was a lot of clay, a lot of mud. We were there in winter, which wasn't a lot of fun, but the archaeology was worth it. It was really, really exciting. So goods were being produced and traded here. So we found a Roman pottery kiln. That's a picture on the left there. You can see the reddened earth, which shows that it was heated to really high temperatures. And there were lots of wasters, which are pots which fell during the firing process, which were found inside. Had some higher stage small finds as well, which is more than what you typically expect from a farmstead in this sort of area. I'll talk a bit more about those later. And so we think that this would have been a really important site. It was in use from the Middle Iron Age, around 300 BC, through to the late Roman period AD, as well as the really exciting kiln. There was a corn drying oven potentially, which is really exciting. And then lots of field systems as well. With loads of pottery, loads of animals showing that they kept animals here, they butchered them, they ate them. Some other finds such as loom weights and personal dress items show that people would have lived and worked inside the roundhouses that we found. So there were 3 main roundhouse structures, and one was likely used for textile production, and the others were potentially used for living inside. So these were the first sort of early phase sites that we excavated. As part of that, we had some communications going out. I don't know if you guys were aware of this, if you were sort of keeping tabs on the project and how it's been going. But we started our dedicated archaeology portal on the MOLA website. So we've got some background information on the project, videos and podcasts. Started our Highways to the Past podcast, which allows for various specialists and stakeholders to engage in longer discussions around the site and various interpretations. So those are really interesting, and they've been ongoing as well with the later stages of the project. I've also got all of our social media posts going out. I love this photo of some of the team cleaning off their tools at the end of the day and posing in some really great poses. It's one of my favorite photos. So if we look a little bit more closely at the artifacts we found in these earlier stages, we had lots and lots of pottery. We found some flint, lots of animal bone as well, loom weights, even some coins, wooden objects and structures, which is really, really exciting, metal objects, work stone, and grains and seeds. So even though the settlement itself was more started from the Iron Age, we do have evidence of people using this land, moving across this land from all the way back to the Neolithic, around 6,000 and 4,200 years ago, and the Bronze Age, which is evidenced in these arrowheads, which are really, really beautiful. So clearly we had people hunting wild animals in this landscape long before formal settlements were developed. We don't actually know about all of our artifacts that we found. We're not able to identify all of them. So we've got this really tiny vessel here, which is really cute. I really like it, but we just don't know what it was used for. We've got some ideas. Maybe it was for spices, makeup, storing something really rare and expensive. Could just be a child's toy. So we'll see if we uncover any more of these across the scheme, or if anybody's able to do further research and work out what it is. Please do let us know if you've got any ideas. It's always great to hear what other people think up about possible uses of finds. So pottery was probably the most ubiquitous type of find that we found from the Iron Age and Roman periods. We found some really nice Samian ware. You can see on that photo on the left the sort of reddish, very smooth surfaced fragment of pot. That's a small sherd of Samian, which is a higher status type of pottery. So again, shows how important the settlement was. And we also found a piece of amphora. I actually found the piece of amphora. It was one of the first slots that I dug on the site. It was really, really exciting to find something like that. We totally weren't expecting it. Obviously, we're quite far away from the coast, and amphora, they're mainly used for storing liquids such as wine and olive oil. This one in particular was for holding olive oil, and it would have been produced in southern Spain. So clearly it's traveled a long distance to get to this site. So again, showing these connections that the site had with the rest of the country and the continent, and also its importance and wealth. We had a lot of animal bone as well. I haven't got any photos here, but at the moment we think that there were quite a lot of cows, some sheep and pigs as well, that were being bred here and eaten. Didn't have so much evidence for poultry or game though. So some more really exciting finds. We've got this really amazing image of a wooden ladder that's been preserved for ages and ages. I think it's probably dating back to the Iron Age, so again over about 2,000 years old. It's really rare to find preserved wood as an organic material. It does not last well, but these lovely waterlogged clay environments have meant that it's lasted, and we're able to excavate it and preserve this. So not fun for us to dig in, but really good for preserving really exciting finds like this. And we also had this really large rotary quern. These were simple hand mills used for grinding grains and cereals. So show that this was an agricultural community here. That's my friend Andrew holding it. He likes to say that his hands are famous because this photo's been used for quite a lot of social posts. Also found these charred spelt grains. So we're not just looking for really large finds, we're also looking for really tiny finds that come out of our soil samples. These are really useful for working out how the land was used and what people were doing here. So these ones we found were germinated, which means that they'd started to put out shoots. This is important because grains are only allowed to germinate in quantity before they're dried when people are making malt, which is the first step to producing beer. So these people, yeah, they like to have a drink, it seems. And we haven't actually found any further evidence for beer production. So it's possible that only the malt was produced on this site and then the beer production happened elsewhere. But again, that shows that there was a lot of interconnection in this area. These are the fun, shiny finds that we found. So there are more than 40 late Roman coins, which is a really large number for this type of farmstead. So again, pointing to the wealth, as well as this lovely silver ring and this really nice ring-headed pin from the early to middle Iron Age. So the site was imported from the Iron Age right through to the Roman period, when they had connections across the country. So this type of dress pin was more commonly found in the south and across the chalklands. So potentially there was somebody visiting, maybe they lost their pin on site or gifted it to somebody, or somebody went south, they found this, they saw this really nice style of pin and then decided to copy it. We've also found a copper weight, which is kind of a small commonplace object, but shows how important this would have been as a trading centre. So people would have been coming to this site to trade different goods, buy, sell and haggle. Talk a bit more about the loom weights now. So we've got a picture of a reconstruction of a loom, which shows the threads going left to right and up and down, and people would have woven cloth on these. And like I said, one of the roundhouses we think may have been used for textile production because of the large amount of loom weights that were found. That's the image in the middle. So yeah, that's quite interesting. That might have been one of the main things that they were trading. We also found a lot of grains, seeds and pollen, like those spelt grains from the slide before, that really help with telling us how the landscape was being used and also what was growing in the landscape. These are really great pieces of evidence to understand the environment that people were living in. Another thing that experts have identified is a type of plant called henbane. This is usually found in soils that are particularly warm and rich in nitrogen, which means it's likely rubbish or manure. This henbane sample was found in a late Iron Age watering hole, which would have been used for animals, so manure is quite likely, which is by the eastern boundary of the settlement. So we're going to analyse more samples and see if we can find more examples of henbane, see if it was only present in certain areas or at certain times. So this Iron Age watering hole sort of around 100 BC to AD 43. So we'll see if we can find some earlier or later examples and see what that will tell us about where livestock were being kept. So those are the projects that are sort of completed the excavation, and the post-ex is well underway. So we're going to talk a little bit about what projects we're doing now. So this is another really fun one. I really like this one. I worked on this one again pretty much from start to finish as an assistant supervisor and then as a supervisor. So I've got a slightly different look at this one. I got to help design slot plans, work out where we were going to put slots in. So it was a really exciting project for me. So you can see the geophysical interpretation on the left, which shows a really large and fairly complex system of enclosures and trackways. This was slightly different geology. We weren't on the clay here. It was kind of river terrace gravel, so everything was a lot sandier, a lot more stony than the previous sites that we've been on. Unfortunately, we weren't able to excavate all of these lovely blue lines here. We were focusing on the area to the south. So we've got this really nice sort of rectangular enclosure. There's a ring ditch on the inside, and then we just caught the southern boundary of the enclosure that's going towards the north. Excuse me, sorry. So the trenching suggested a Middle to Late Iron Age origin for the enclosures, with the potential of going through to the Roman period. There's a bit of a trend here. Most of our sites are Iron Age to Roman transitionary. They didn't find too many exciting artifacts while they were trenching, but we found a little bit more when we were doing the full excavation. So yeah, we found there was likely to be some industrial activity happening in the southeast corner. We've got these more square enclosures. There were some kiln bars, which suggest that there were some kilns, there was some pottery production happening in this area. We just don't have any actual examples of kilns. They don't survive as well from the Iron Age. They're, yeah, just not as tough as the Roman ones, I guess. And then we also had some really interesting really nice pieces of pot coming out from that southern boundary at the top of our excavation area. So we had some more examples of Roman pottery, had some really nice mortaria coming out of there. So it seems possible that the settlement started off in the southern area in the Iron Age and might have slowly travelled north, shifted north over time. So yeah, we have the earliest phases here. I don't know if you might have seen in the news as well, there was a pit that was excavated inside that ring ditch, which we're pretty sure is a roundhouse. But a pit excavated in the middle there made it onto the BBC. It was really exciting. It was full of animal bone, and we think it was likely the result of a great big feast, and they just threw all their waste into there. But that's going to be really helpful with understanding more about what people were eating, how they were living, and what they were doing on this site. So another one that is kind of underway is its Middle to Late Iron Age squared enclosure. It contains at least 2 roundhouses with some internal subdivisions. They might have survived into the early Roman period, and there were lots of recuts in this ditch around the outside, so they basically kept digging this ditch over and over, which suggests that it was long-lived and well-maintained. The site was relatively well preserved, and this ditch survived to about 1.5 metres, which is pretty deep for a ditch. Takes a lot of digging to get down that deep. Animal bone was well preserved in the ditch, including a full set of antlers. There might have been some industrial activity happening in the area as well, so there's some potential for some really interesting finds out of this site. This one's really exciting. It's possibly related to a villa. So I don't know if you can see in the geophysical image here, sort of in the northern side, there are some really square shapes. So we think that was likely a villa complex. Our excavation area sort of to the southeast of that area. So we think we've got some peripheral activity related to this villa. So we've got some quarrying activity, potentially some kilns. There were some burnt stones found in the trenching, which might be kiln related. So some interesting ancillary activity happening around the villa. And we also think that there might have been a sort of bank put in to protect the view, I suppose, of the fancy rich people living in their villas. So they didn't have to look out and see everybody digging in the quarries. They could have this bank masking the view. They did also find in the trenching a large pit which contained some early to mid-Saxon pottery. So again, another example of some possible Saxon activity happening in the area. So the one hypothesis here is that the villa, which would have lasted long after the Romans left, would have drawn the Saxons to the area, provided a focus point for activity there. So those are the sites that we're going to be digging on, or currently digging on. We're still underway with our processing. So got a nice video here just to illustrate what happens when we're processing samples. So I'll play that for you and then talk through it.
It looks interesting, kind of interesting, and then in a nice clean.
So yeah, those sieves that the videos ended on, those are there to collect all those really small pieces of pollen and environmental evidence. And so a pump is pushed through these tanks, so it's continually flowing water. Our samples are tipped into our tanks, and our processors, they're there. It's called agitating, and they're just sort of mixing up the dirt, helping break down the clays and the soils and the sediments. So it can release all of these really useful, very, very tiny pieces of environmental evidence, which we process. As well as doing these soil samples, we're also processing our artifacts and assessing early archaeological work.
Looks interesting, kind of.
There we go. So we're still doing a lot of community engagement. Got a lot more social media posts going out. And we've also got a learning zone, which has been added to the archaeology portal. So there are resources there for teachers and students, as well as homeschool children and their parents. I was homeschooled, so I know I definitely appreciate having something like this around when I was a kid. So going to expand the content to include richer audio visuals, such as drone footage, site plans, reconstructions, and 3D models. And we've had our digital engagement assistants on site as well. So the archaeologists on the ground, they've been producing a lot of our social media posts. So you can get a really sort of direct link to the archaeological excavation that's happening on site. One of my friends, Jamie, who's one of our DEAs, and he did one of the highways to the past podcast. So you can go on there and listen to what he has to say about his experience. He talks a lot about how he likes digging big holes. He's very good at digging big holes. He's really fast. We've also got our 60-second science productions, which are youth-led. So youth groups come on, they do a tour around the MOLA's processing facilities, and then they can choose a section to film and present on camera. And then it's edited to 60-second pieces to be embedded within our portal and on social media. We've got school craft sessions happening as well, where we're going into schools. Museum in a Box as well, which are sessions led by our engagement project officer and held at local community spaces for young families, home-educated groups, and possibly older people as well. So you can go and handle artifacts and create a piece of art or craft inspired by the stories in the box. I'm also doing public talks, again, like the one I'm doing now. I think we've got another one booked for in a few months as well. So we could talk a little about what's next and what we're planning to do. In terms of engagement, we're going to build on these thing links, which are interactive maps. So we've already got one up for Field 44, one of the earlier sites, which is really great. So you can go and have a look and see where some of the artifacts that we found were actually found and see some of the phasing. So see where the earlier features were and where the later features were. So it's sort of the Iron Age and Roman period features. So these are really great. I love maps and these are based off of the ones that we create on site. So these are really accurate and really, really useful to help understand sites. In the field, we've got a lot more sites to excavate. You can see sort of the purple boxes on the right. They show where all of our sites are located along the scheme. So we've got to do a lot more digging. I'm also going to do some building recording. So the famous Black Cat sculpture, which sits in the middle of the roundabout, that's going to have a building recording done for it. Currently, we're planning to finish in August 2023, but that's all going to depend on what we find and what happens within the scheme. In terms of post-excavation work, got a lot more artifacts to process. Every artifact that we find gets sent back to our processing teams and they wash and analyse those. The soil samples as well to see what environmental evidence we can find. We'll do further assessments and recommendations for any further work and assess all the archaeological work results, combine that with analysis of finds, and then we'll produce a publication. Our analysis will compare our results to other projects in the region, including results from the A14, which are excavations that MOLA will contribute to previously and are in the same area. So hopefully we'll get a really great understanding of what's been happening across this area of the Midlands. If you do want to find out more, we've got links for all of our socials, the community engagement email address, the web address for the A428 portal. So feel free to copy these down and get in touch if you've got more questions about the archaeology. So yeah, that is it. Thank you very much. Hopefully we've got some questions and I'll try to answer those as best I can. So I'll stop sharing now and hand back over to Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was fascinating. I've got some questions of my own, but I'll defer to the audience. We've got heaps of time. I think I actually scheduled an hour and a half, so we could ask questions for the next 40 minutes if we wanted to. We already have one from Ian Mason, who asks, could the very small bowl-like thing be a gaming piece? Could be. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, would have been nice if we found a few of them. That could have been a really good indicator of it being used for games. So we'll see if you find any more across the site. That's a really good theory. So just to remind people, if you want to ask questions, you can type them directly into the chat box. Kevin Evans has asked, were there any burials? There have been some burials, yes. This is quite a sensitive topic for a lot of people, so I don't want to speak too much about it, but we have found a few. We haven't had any sort of big cemetery sites, just sort of a few burials on a few of the sites we've excavated so far. Just while we wait, I've got a question. I've been reading Patricia's Southern's book on Roman occupation of Britain, and there's a lot of documentary evidence from that period from Roman writers. For example, I was reading about after the rebellion of AD 60, some farmsteads being abandoned. I was wondering to what extent, when you do excavations like this, is it ever possible to match up any of the evidence with documentary evidence from that time?
It certainly can be possible, yes. We rely a lot on the dating evidence that we get from certain features. So they give us an idea of when sites were no longer being used. So if you find some pot, also maybe some coins, if it's sort of the later Roman period, that might indicate that that was sort of the last time that the site was used, and then there are no more later features there. That could definitely match up with that and show that sites were being abandoned around the same time that documents were recording this.
So we have a question from Margaret Sakalaridis. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. The villa you mentioned, what evidence that that it is a villa other than what evidence is there that it is a villa other than the shape? It's a good question.
Very good question. So the shape will definitely be used to, we'll compare that with other sort of villa sites that have been excavated. So we can sort of match the shape up with ones that have been excavated previously. So it is quite compelling evidence. I don't know too much about the results of the previous desk-based assessment, but there might have been evidence in there as well from previous excavations. Again, stuff that might have shown up in crop marks and things that might have evidenced villa activity, but for the main part, I think it is just the shape of that that geophysical survey that's indicating a villa, and the activity that we've had around it in the site around is sort of the same as you'd expect from other villas in the periphery of other villas. So the sort of ancillary work that we've got going on fits with what we'd expect for that sort of area of a villa site.
And just to emphasise that the villa is outside the excavation area, so there isn't a way to investigate it through.
Sadly,
yeah,
not as part of this scheme.
Yeah,
Maybe somebody in the future will have a look at it.
Yeah.
Prove it one way or the other.
So from Michael Coles, we've got the question: have you started on the Eltisley Caxton part of the route yet?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. I can't say for definite. The main sites that I've been on were those sort of first three that I talked about, the first ones that are already complete, and then the first one that was sort of in the process of. So I haven't been on the other two particularly, or any other ones that have started up. So I'm not sure about that one. Sorry, Michael.
I'm just going to put my email address in the chat, actually, in case people think of questions afterwards or want me to confirm any questions that we can't answer now. Feel free to send me an email on that email address. So Julia Fiddler, if you have found burials, are they able to research causes of death and age?
Potentially, yeah. I'm not an osteologist, but we've got some really great experts in. So when we do excavate those, we'll send them back to our specialists, and they're able to look for things, see if there are any signs of injuries that may have been the cause of death. Sort of the way the bone survives, sort of how it looks and things could also indicate different types of illnesses and also age as well. So yes, it's definitely something that can be done based on, depending on, yeah, what they look like and how much we're able to send back to them.
We've got a question, when will the highway start on the road building? But I think we're probably not well placed to answer that question, are we, Lucy?
No,
So
I'd refer you back to those first, those first communication sort of emails and things. So get in touch with National Highways about that. We won't be involved. The archaeologists won't be building the road.
I was doing research on one of the thing links on, I think, the site that you said that you were supervisor on, and then, or assistant supervisor, and then supervisor on. And I remember there was a flooding incident of the ooze, which was detectable in the archaeology. Is that something that you dealt with?
Yeah, so there was most of the sort of flooding incidents or evidence for that will happen outside of our excavation area. So previous excavations a bit closer to the river, because we're not quite up next to the river, but we think that that may have possibly caused the settlement to shift northwards potentially. If it kept sort of flooding near this area, that might have made it harder to occupy as well. So yeah, we didn't have too much evidence directly on our site, but from other research into other excavations that have happened previously.
And there was a well as well, wasn't there, just on the edge of the Paleo Channel? Is that right?
Yes, there was. Yes, I'd forgotten about that one. Yes.
Yeah, could you tell us about that? Because I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Very unexpected. Yeah. So that was sort of in the centre of the site. I don't know if I can pull the slides up again to sort of show where it was. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I suppose.
Could do.
You'll have to share your screen again.
Yeah, doing that. Scroll through to the right one. Oh, okay. I just got rid of it all. Sorry, try that again.
But I thought it was interesting that that was situated on the edge of the Paleo Channel, which would make sense, wouldn't it? Because obviously
Yeah.
the table would be nearer to the surface there.
Yeah, would make sense. You can actually see this is the thing link for that site. So the round circle sort of in the middle, the blue indicates where the Paleo Channel was. So for people who don't know, a Paleo Channel is, or in this case, it's something where a river used to flow. This one's sort of related to the glaciation, so very, very old, before people were around. So we would have had basically an old river here that then filled up. So we didn't have the same geology along where this blue line is. So it was a lot more clayey, whereas the rest of it's quite sandy. And then, yeah, we had the watering hole, the well rather, is that little circle sort of in the corner, in the middle, pretty much in the middle of sight.
And what's the current theory on there was a horse skeleton, wasn't there? Are you allowed to talk about that? Remains. I know
Nobody said I can't talk about the horse skeleton.
I know the remains can sometimes be something that we don't talk about, but I think horse skeletons are okay, aren't they?
If anybody is upset about me talking about horse skeletons, please do say and I will stop. Horses are my favourite animal, so it's a bit sad for me sometimes. But yeah, it wasn't found sort of like somebody had just buried a horse. It was very disarticulated, so all the bones were kind of jumbled up. So we're not sure why it was there or whether it had been butchered. Perhaps it's possible that people were eating horses here. Maybe we're not 100% sure. So it wasn't like a horse had died and then they buried it nicely. It had been sort of chopped up a little bit before it was put into the ground, which is quite interesting.
So we've got another question. There seems to be a lot of Iron Age material. Is that correct? Is it predominantly Iron Age?
Yes. So from the trial trenching, we're expecting most of the sites in this area to be Iron Age, with some transitioning into the Roman period. So one of the big things we're looking at with this scheme is to see how that transition happened, see if there are sites that were abandoned at the end of the Iron Age, see what happened when sites did transition through into the Roman period, if there was sort of a break and then reoccupation, or if it was sort of more of a smooth transferal. So it's quite an interesting topic that we're hoping that by doing so many sites across this area, we'll be able to understand a bit more about that.
And is there a clear reason as to why there's no kind of, or very little early medieval kind of evidence?
Not that I'm aware of. Often sort of early medieval Saxon features, they're often kind of on their own. So the possible SFB, that's kind of normal to just sort of find one just sort of on its own. It's a bit of a strange time period. I haven't been able to excavate too many sites which have this sort of material, so it's definitely not my area of expertise. So yeah, I'm not too sure. Maybe it's just luck of the draw. And just outside these excavation areas, we've got loads of Saxon settlements. But yeah, I'm not too sure about the exact reasoning for why we haven't got too much of it.
So there seems to be a kind of abandonment of these sites at the end of the Roman occupation.
Yeah, it's just that possibility of the villa site where it was potentially abandoned at the end of the Roman period, and then Saxons might have been drawn to the remains of a standing building and use that as a focus point for later activity.
I might just ask another question while I wait to see if anyone else has one. So what in the archaeological evidence is indicative of this kind of transition that you could say between the Iron Age and the Roman kind of, let's say, the kind of move towards more Roman ways? Are there kind of indications of that change that you can see in the archaeology?
Yeah, so if you think about Field 44, that settlement, it pretty much kept the same plan, but we can tell from our dating evidence that this was being occupied in the Iron Age and in the Roman period. So clearly there was a transition here where people knew about the previous Iron Age settlement. They were potentially the same people who were just adapting to new Roman ways of living, using Roman pottery, trading more widely with the Roman Empire. And so they just had, we've got this evidence of Roman material in a settlement that's based on the same plan as the Iron Age settlement. So that's a really interesting example of a settlement maintaining the same location, pretty much spot on. A lot of the sort of ditches and things that were recut, they follow similar or the same alignment as the earlier Roman Iron Age ones. So yeah, that's one really interesting example of this transition, which we can tell through our material culture.
Thank you. A question from Michael. Do you have any environmental evidence about the state of the landscape in the Iron Age and Roman periods?
We don't have too much yet, but that's something that hopefully, once we've completed all of our excavations and we've gone through all these samples, you saw that video, it's quite a time-consuming process to process all of our samples and get all of this information out. But once we can have our experts properly analyze any sort of snail shells, charred seeds, things like that, they can get an understanding of what the environment would have looked like across this whole spread that we're excavating on, and be able to compare between the Iron Age and the Roman period based on what we can find. Unfortunately, some sites we don't have such good evidence of the environment. So that site, yeah, with the possible flooding, the sandy site, that doesn't sand doesn't preserve a lot of these materials particularly well. So we're not going to say for definite, yes, we'll know everything about the state of the landscape, because it's going to be dependent on preservation and the types of sites. But hopefully, once we're done and our experts have had a good long look through their microscopes at everything, we'll have a good understanding.
I think one thing in relation to that question, is it Simon Marcus? Is that the name of one of your supervisors?
He's the manager.
Right, yeah, so I was speaking to him when we were doing the thing links, and he was saying that they found in the field that had the Paleochannel, they found tree boles, and they thought that perhaps that was evidence of woodland clearance for Iron Age farming, so they would clear the land to accommodate space for field enclosures. Is that right?
Yeah, that's happened on a fair few sites. So yeah, that's another good indicator of environmental change and landscape change and how people are using landscape differently. And we can sometimes work out what kind of trees were growing there based off of this smaller environmental evidence we get out of samples.
So can you explain what a tree bole is exactly?
It's basically just the remains of where a tree was. If you've ever seen a tree that's fallen over, you can kind of see the sort of bowl-shaped depression that it leaves in the ground. That's basically what a tree bole is. Sometimes called tree throws, which I think is quite a fun word. I imagine people throwing trees around.
So then presumably that eventually fills in with a different kind of sediment, and you can excavate it in the same way that you'd excavate a pit or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much, that's it.
We've got a question from Julia again. Can DNA prove if the bones could have been Roman? Presumably the human remains.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be doing DNA analysis on the burials that we have found so far, so I'm not too sure about that one. That's definitely one for the experts, I think. Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure what sort of analyses they're going to be doing. But yeah, DNA analysis is a really interesting kind of new technology. It's definitely growing a lot. There are a lot of interesting papers out about it, so definitely want to look into and learn more about.
Presumably you can't do DNA evidence on anything. You need good samples and things like that, don't you?
Definitely, it's going to be very dependent on what the sample's like and the state of preservation and yeah, stuff like that.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? If not, then I would just like to thank Lucie very much. That was brilliant. Really, really interesting. And thank everybody for attending the webinar today. If you have any other questions, as I said, do contact me at lnorthall@mola.org.uk. and I can get back to you. I'm going to just copy now a feedback form into the chat. So yeah, if you don't mind filling in forms like this, please do, because it helps us. We can learn more about how we can improve our outreach. Otherwise, it remains to say goodbye and thank you for coming. And I suppose a silent round of applause for Lucy, except for me.
Thanks very much, guys.